So Elena Gissi, I hope I pronounced well, but I think it should be this way. Yeah, thank you. So Elena, you're going to run the second part of the morning, and you will talk to us about what is needed from science so that research can fit the needs of the decision makers. So this part is going to be really more about how science contributes to the policy work. Again, you can know more about Elena checking the speakers and participants booklets. But we already introduced Elena before, and I think we jump now in the presentation. So Elena will share two presentations, and you will be able to ask questions after each of them. So we will start with the first one, which is about 15 minutes. And then there will be 10 minutes for question and answers. And then we will move to the second part, and we will have again question and answers. Elena, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Chantal. So first of all, I would like to thank you all for inviting me. I am a scientist, and I actually am a Marie Curie Fellow with the CNR and Stanford University. So for the next 3 years, I will work with the Stanford and CNR. So here I was asked to introduce in the first part the principles of ecosystem-based management, and specifically the application of marine spatial planning. And so I will run rapidly to the key concepts. Sorry. Okay. So to the first part of the presentation about, and I will start from the challenge about sustainable blue growth. So as Marta Pasquale just mentioned about sustainable blue economy, as we challenge that you have to dive into. And I know that for many of you, this concept are enough clear. So, but it's just a way for us to set the scene for the discussion between all of us. As you may know, there is a shift between marine conservation towards sustainable blue growth or sustainable blue economy. And so many initiatives worldwide has pushed, and also the sustainable development pushed for sustainable exploitation of marine resources and the maintenance also of these marine resources. But in a way, there is a shift from the conservation as the core of management towards sustainable development of marine resources and our ocean. So but we know that there are many uses and many activities that are taking place, and more will come. So it is quite critical to understand how we manage to really achieve and to be effective in the sustainability of the economy that we are thinking about. Whatever sector you are, you are aware that there are problems or challenges, I would say, about keeping uses in a sustainable way, in sustainable levels for the marine environment, and specifically for the Mediterranean. So how do we support sustainable growth? How do we take this to a sustainability level? So we have an opportunity, which is sustainable ecosystem-based management. So from the theory, sustainable development, so ecosystem-based management is an integrated approach to management that considers the entire ecosystem, including humans. And the general goal is to maintain ecosystem in healthy, productive, and resilient conditions so that it is able to provide several benefits, several services to humans. Another important aspect is that ecosystem-based management differs from current approaches, which is usually focus on a single sector or single species or single activity, because it considers the cumulative impacts. So the combination of all the potential effects of multiple uses on the marine ecosystems. So, but what is the core? So in this talk, I'm trying to focus on the core message of ecosystem-based management, because as I said in the introduction, there are now several guidelines and several international guidelines pointing out all the different aspects. But what is really at the core of this ecosystem-based management is the fact that integrated management is an approach that is centered on understanding and leveraging on the connections between the interacting parts of what we could say one system, one unique system. So in a way, recalling what also Chris was saying, we need to frame the problem that we have to manage, to define the vision, so where we want to go, how we want the system to look like in the future, to understand all the cause-effect relationships that are, in a way, intervenes in the definition of this problem, cause-effect relationships that are across horizontal or vertical domains, or across jurisdictions, or across marine and terrestrial domains, that goes actually to the source of the problem and to the cause of the problem. And in this analysis of the cause-effect relationships and so of the interactions, we need to also to connect the communities, the actors, and the agents that can benefit from services, for instance, of the natural system, or then affect the system. And on the other hand, we also have to connect the decision makers with the communities, actors, and agents that act on the system. So as I was saying, I think that the importance, the very core message of the ecosystem-based management is about interactions, about the connections, interacting parts. So I bring here like this scheme, which is an elaboration from the not recent ecosystem-based management statement from Compass. And so you see that there are several key elements. I put in light the ones that are also included in the UNEP guide from Gardi et al. Of 2011. So the principles on which ecosystem-based management is grounded is the fact of considering the connections between all parts of the ecosystems, applying an ecosystem service approach, meaning trying to understand the benefits that the ecosystems are able to provide, but with the beneficiaries and also with the people that manages the provisioning of these services. Another important aspect is to understand and addressing the cumulative impacts, but also in management and especially managing for multiple objectives. Another important aspect is the learning and adaptation process. So, as I said before, so applying ecosystem-based approach to management. So an ecosystem-based management is more than single sector or multiple sector approach, but it's really related to considering the entirety of the ecosystems, even when we deal with one sector or one part of the system. But what is this really? So if we recall the idea of the connection, we can start from considering, for instance, what is our target, the environmental receptors. So we can go back through the side of pressures. I'm sorry, I don't know how to remove this bar here. So we can go back to deconstruct the pressures on the specific environmental receptors. So we can reconstruct the pressures through the pressure transfer agent until arrive to the drivers of such pressures, so to the agents that produce the pressures, and also to understand the different contributions to our environmental receptor. In this case, I draw this from a study that has been just issued about managing pressures on cetaceans in the Ionian Sea. On the other side, we can take, we can also identify the confidence, so the level of knowledge and the level of trust in our assessment by defining the source of knowledge on which we base our assessment. We can also say, if we, on the left side, we went through the connections, through the pressures, on the right side, we can consider the benefits. So starting from the environmental receptors, we know that these, specifically these environmental components, can provide many ecosystem services to a series of beneficiaries, which can be communities, but also economic actors or human activities. So with this link between the beneficiaries, the environment providing benefits, but also which is under stress, we can, on the other hand, think about ecosystem-based management to manage for multiple benefits, but also to control the pressures. So with integrated management of multiple sectors, we can in a way reconstruct these entire links of connections on the entire ecosystem between multiple sectors and multiple actors. So I jump into the core of what I was asked, so about marine spatial planning. So why marine spatial planning? Marine spatial planning is considered as the tool to operationalize ecosystem-based management and to support sustainable development. This has been clearly stated, for instance, by the European Commission, that marine, in our case, is maritime spatial planning, but we will use marine spatial planning today. So marine spatial planning is the tool to operationalize ecosystem-based management. Why? Because it pursues a vision, it aims at managing multiple sectors, it aims at managing and considering interactions between uses and uses and the environment. It operates at a large scale, so it is basically able to see multiple interactions on wider areas. It applies an adaptive approach, and it builds management and planning on the best available knowledge. But how really MSP work? How does it work? So I will make a simple example, a metaphor that I'm sure you have passed at least once in your life. So consider that you move to a new place, to a new apartment, and you have to furnish your room. So how are you going to furnish it? First of all, you will discuss with your partner, whoever it is, and with multiple users of the room in arranging the furniture and for multiple priorities and benefits. So if you are in smart working, or if you like gardening, or if you like to meet with people, or if you do whatever you want in your living room, of course, you have to arrange furniture considering the characteristics and constraints of the setting. For instance, the heating or the lighting. You will not put something in front of the radiator, of course. So you, in a way, you are trying to be effective in considering the setting in which you manage your room. And of course, you do it for the well-being of all the users in an healthy room. And basically, MSP is very similar to the problem that we have to furnish the room, but of course in a different, at a different scale, because our common room is our ocean, and our overarching goals are the Sustainable Development Goals.
So you have 3 minutes to go, as
yes,
you asked
thanks.
me.
Yes, thank you. So basically, when we do MSP in a real world example, we basically try to organize uses at sea, allocating uses and vocations at sea, considering potential future interactions between uses, so avoiding conflicts, and supporting synergies between uses, but also in trying to consider potential negative effects on the marine environment, so to protect marine resources. And so you arrive to an allocation, to a plan. Considering the most important part is that planning is a forward-looking activity, so you don't have to think about the conflicts or the synergies or the how it looks like today, but you have to project and to think about the future, the future sea that you want. So the sea that the configuration and the vision for the future. Currently, MSP is on the way and is covering almost 50% of the exclusive economic zones. And at UNESCO YOC website, you have a very beautiful frame picture of the state of MSP currently all around the world. And if you recall the idea of connections between, as a main core of ecosystem-based management, you can consider that, for instance, in the Mediterranean Sea, the European Framework Directive on Maritime Spatial Planning is being applied by each member state, considering and planning their waters. So there is specific parts of the sea, which is actually under their responsibility by the law of the sea. So, but on the other hand, if you just consider the connections because of the oceanographic movements of water masses, you see that we have a much to deal with interactions and connections between our waters within the marine regions. So here, this is just to recall the main core of connections and interactions with all of you. So here, I just finished the first part of the talk, and I open some questions for you. These questions will stay open all week. So I open the question and answer session. The first one, we have 10 minutes, and I kindly ask you to fill in and answering to these questions. You can do it now, but we basically decided to open and you find the link on the chat that was put by Martina. Sorry. So these questions are, the first one is, from your experience, what connections, interaction would you like to make in the direction of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals in your experience, in your field? And the second question is, what interactions did you miss or which would be useful to make in your field experience or projects and so on? So these questions will be open for you also to go back in the coming days, and also these are very important for us when we will set the next activity for the fall, in fall. So I open now the discussion with all of you, and I ask you to go and check on the chat. Yes, on the chat.
Yes, sorry,
Okay.
Elena, if I may, just quickly. So I've sent to all the panelists, so the speakers and the trainees, the link for the document in Google Drive where they can add their questions and the answers. Sorry, and it's going to remain open through the whole week. And to all the other attendees, I've just sent you an email where you can file the JOT form and also participate and give an input and feedback to Elena. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. So now we're going to take questions or suggestions, ideas, reflections. I see there's already someone.
We have Gerasimos raising hand, so I'm going to ask you to turn on your camera and microphone and allow you to speak, please.
Sorry, it was by mistake, but I really enjoyed Elena's presentation. Apologies.
Okay, I think there's something in the chat.
They're actually discussing about the blue growth and blue economy, if I'm not wrong. Tosca. Maybe Tosca, you want to step in and explain us a little bit.
Well, I'm not an expert, so I cannot really explain. But it seems that if you speak about growth, you use the GDP to measure the performance of a government, of a state, of how things are going. So you want to make more money moving, and for example, in some, I make an example from Italy. I know that the prostitution has been included in the counting of the GDP. So actually, you cannot say this is something good, but it counts to make that you are growing and you're doing well. So sustainable growth, it seems two things that cannot go together. And so with this new accounting system should take into consideration climate change, biodiversity loss. So not only the economic performance, but also the destruction of the natural capital. And so it would be like a new framework inside to which perform economic activities. So I think instead of, for me, this, before we were talking about advocating, well, in this way, you are advocating, if you want, but by changing the rules of the game. So if you are a politician, you are not considered well because you grew the GDP, but because you grew the new metric, which is the CER. Yeah. So, you know, so I think it's important that I'm not an economist, and if there is someone that it's more, which is better than me, should please correct if I say something wrong.
Thank you for this, Elena. Do you want to react to this?
Yes. Okay. So I know that that there is a debate about these blue growth and so on, as you mentioned. But honestly, I as a scientist working to support and to inform MSP, I keep the definitions given by the policies. So, and it's clear that, for instance, the European Union is pushing for blue growth and considering new jobs, occupations, and in a way, this is part of the game, I would say. So I leave this and I refer to the policy documents. Then in literature, you will find several, for instance, studies about the fact that blue economy, blue growth are concepts that are not yet well defined. And so there is a risk that you will go through more uses, more pressures on the environment and so on. But on the other hand, we have an opportunity to work within these processes to make them as much as possible, to be very clear in the trade-offs of supporting blue economy. And in a way, I think that also in the Sustainable Development Goals, new jobs and occupation and hunger and then the poverty pass through new jobs and so on. So in a way, I keep the debate for the economists and economic, and I try, and the second part of my talk will deal a bit more into that with that.
Okay, thank you. I see
Marta as well.
Yeah.
Is raising her hand. Please, Marta, can you also turn on your camera?
Yes.
So we can spotlight you. Thank you.
Let's see. Okay. Yes. No, just to add to what Elena was saying, to thank her for her nice presentation. I mean, I think there is many opportunities into what now it's called blue economy, sustainable blue economy. Let's not forget the word sustainable. I know the term blue growth has been used so far, but so far in Europe it's been changing to blue economy because, as said by before, there is no sustainable blue growth as such, because the more you grow, the less sustainability. So we need to go for a sustainable blue economy that involves all the different economic sectors, which brings me to the talk that Elena was mentioning. I mean, how do we do that? How do our economics keep increasing, and how do we cope with all these uses when their potential impacts can be added, or they can be integrated, and they need to all to be measured in the Mediterranean? And this is a challenge, the interconnectedness of the different impacts of these different activities, which is much also related to the question that she was raising in the questionnaire of the connections of the different SDGs. I mean, SDGs cannot be tackled as independent. If you want to tackle SDG 14 for the oceans, then you also need to think about equity. You also need to think about all the other SDGs. So I think this interconnection between the economy, the sectors, the pollution, and etc., it is what is the real challenge towards real sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we need to jump into your second presentation, Elena. So again, we will answer all the questions. It's just that we also need to keep up with the time. Otherwise, we're going to be ending at 3, and I'm afraid we will have busy agendas. So Elena, if you want to.
I'm sorry, I opened the chat because if not, the bar keeps going down. So
okay.
In a way, I will try in the second part also to answer to the question. Yes, I totally agree that the challenge is about interconnections, but I also trust the fact that we can support and we can make this clear. So how we make a sustainable blue economy. So as a scientist working, and here I bring my perspective. So as a scientist working to address conservation with ecosystem-based marine spatial planning, my entire research is devoted to try to unveil these connections and try to provide knowledge for decision makers then to make decisions. So, and we as a scientist, we can all make our part from our field of experience. So if you go and check the way ecosystem-based management has tried, and specifically I speak here about the marine spatial planning, MSP can, in a way, incorporate conservation in many ways. So to sustain, to support a sustainable blue economy through marine spatial planning. So first of all, when we set our vision in our plans, we can balance social, economic, and conservation objectives. The other part is, of course, when you allocate uses at sea, you can also devote space and make space for new marine protected areas, so to achieve the 30% conservation target. When you when you elaborate the planning decision, the planning actions, you can try first to understand the cause-effect relationships that drive changes in the marine environment, so that with MSP you can act on the drivers and the causes of potential negative effects. So in a way, MSP can really support the idea of controlling and managing potential negative effects of human uses in space and time when you decide where the uses should be allocated. So this is easy to say, but so what is the ecological knowledge that we need to inform MSP? So I here present 2 cases, but you have more if you go into my activity. The first one is about addressing transboundary conservation challenges through marine spatial prioritization. So in this case, in this study, what we tried to do is to tackle a very complex problem. So when you do MSP when you think about setting the 30% target of conservation in the Adriatic and Ionian region, so basically in the entire area between Italy, Croatia, and Slovenia, and other, in total 7 countries. So how do you start? How do you place new marine protected areas, or how do you share the burden of conservation among the countries to be effective? Because on one way, this is an important area for blue economy, and on the other hand, it's also a very important marine region with high biodiversity, and we, for instance, have ecological and biologically significant areas. So it is an area also that shares marine resources. So how do we set the 30% target? So with this experiment, we said we wanted to illustrate the value of using a spatial prioritization as a mechanism to, in a way, address this complex problem and try to dismantle, so in simple problems then for decision makers to reflect on. So in a way, we applied Marxan, and we examined the way we set our targets in conservation for biodiversity across the countries and also across maritime industries operating in the region. So for the main target of the study was to achieve the 30% target of conservation. And you have to consider that in this case, we had more than 70 conservation features in the Adriatic and Ionian region among 6 countries and 14 maritime industries. So we used Markson, which is a decision support tool, to identify priority areas conservation by, on one hand, meeting the predefined conservation targets, so the 30%, but on the other hand, minimizing socioeconomic cost. So we used the scenario analysis under the following hypothesis. So on one hand, we identify priority as we set the targets at regional or a country level. So if the targets were basically shared by all the 7 countries, or if they were separated. So in each marine domain, related marine competent area of each state, if the targets were achieved by that. And on the other hand, we consider having the hypothesis with or without cost of negotiating conservation. As a cost of negotiating conservation, we consider the density of maritime uses, because in a way, if you want to, for instance, reserve an area for a marine protected area, you have to negotiate with all the users and uses that you have in that area. So in a way, it is also a cost, for instance, of a transactional cost that you can have to manage that. So, and then we assess the results of the configuration of the new priority areas for conservation, considering the influences on countries and on maritime sectors. So, in a way, sorry, I have to open the chat, if not, okay. So, so as a result, we saw that the influence on how the new priority areas were aggregated was much higher from the side of the costs instead of the influence of the way we set the targets, so at the regional or at national level. And we were also able, we used the most efficient scenario, which is the one which where the targets were set at regional level, but with the cost that are the cost of negotiating new protected areas and new conservation areas. And we were able to identify areas which are most important priority areas for conservation, and to identify the ones that were at the transboundary level from the ones that were at national level. And this can be an entry point for decision makers to start negotiating a transboundary area of conservation. Another important aspect is that as a scientist working to support policy, in a way, the fact that we modeled the cost, considering the density of uses, this in a way implied that we in a way advantaged some sector instead of some others. So the most disadvantaged sector was, for instance, fishery. So the ones that was widespread in the region. And this is in line with what Chris was saying. So to be transparent on the limit and also on the implication of the type of model that you use to support decision makers. I run fast to the second case, which is a case about one of the key points of ecosystem-based management. So to model the cumulative impacts of multiple uses on the marine, on multiple and marine environmental components within a real MSP process that we were part of with CNR in the Mediterranean, and actually in the Adriatic and Ionian region. So in this case, what we did is that we had a problem that was exactly of modeling the cumulative effects for MSP. So we applied a very well established model about source stressor endpoint model. So we basically modeled the pressures on environmental components deriving from human activities. And basically we did that by defining the sensitivities of the environmental components to the specific pressures by the expert survey. And again, we had more than 70 conservation features and 18 pressures and 14 uses. So basically we had a big database about the sensitivities of the environmental components to the pressures deriving from human uses. But the fact that we worked for a real decision-making process created a series of challenges. The first one was that we had to model the area, which was defined by the geographical scope of the planning. So we had a mandate from the decision makers. So they wanted to know the cumulative effects for the entire Adriatic-Ionian region. So, and we struggled so much during the expert survey with our expert, because we involved more than 100 experts in the Adriatic and Ionian region. Because like from the point of view of modelist, of course, we tend as scientists to model where we are more robust with data, or where we are more sure about the data that we have. But if you follow the scope of planning, we had a problem. First of all, following the scope of planning implies a series of uncertainties. For instance, in the data availability for conservation features, pressures, and human uses, and also the different knowledge on the cause-effect relationships, pressures, and impacts that we had on the entire Adriatic and Ionian region. And this, in a way, changed completely our view on the model that we were, as a scientist, producing to support the decisions. So we decided to, on one hand, run the cumulative effect assessment, and so to run the model and to build the model, but to the other hand, to write down and to report all the sources of uncertainty that we were diving into. So as a result of this modeling effort, we arrived to a map where you see the cumulative effect scores. So the reddish areas are the more the darkest. The color is the areas that are more impacted or less impacted. But on the other hand, we also produced an index which was about data availability. So to reflect and to communicate also to policymakers the fact that we had knowledge and the maximum availability of knowledge in the Adriatic, the Italian Adriatic, and less on the western side, but less and the least on the Ionian area. And then we also produced another index, which was the local sensitivity index, which basically tells us about the confidence. So the level of knowledge, the level of evidence, the confidence of the experts in answering to our questions. So to answering about the level of knowledge they had about the effects, the potential effects of pressures on the different environmental components. So by cross-reading these, you have much more information that are needed to decision makers. So in some cases, you have some areas that are hardly impacted with a high level of knowledge, but then you have other areas that seems to be the least impacted, like for instance, the Southern Adriatic, when I'm pointing now. But if you check, it's also the area where we have the least knowledge in general. So this is a way of saying, okay, watch out, because our model says that here it's not very impacted, but it's also the area where we have less knowledge. And if you consider the precautionary principles and the three preliminary conditions that you have to demonstrate to invoke the precautionary principle, which is a key of MSP, but also a key for ecosystem-based management, in a way, we answer to these three conditions, because we said, okay, we have to verify that there are potentially some adverse effects. So we identified them. We defined the availability of scientific data. So we evaluated the availability, but also we evaluated the extent of scientific uncertainty in the analysis. We also made a step forward in this uncertainty definition by running a Monte Carlo simulation. So also to get the uncertainty in the models, in the results.
Sorry, Elena, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, thanks. So thanks. So, and we run this only for the Adriatic area. And basically we found that there are some areas. So the Northern Adriatic was the most impacted under basically most than 95% of simulations that we run in our model. But and the green one are the least impacted in almost 95% of our hypotheses in the model. But what I was more interested is all this gray that you see here. So potentially you have some areas that are the most impacted, but only for the 40% of hypotheses. So what this is very important information for decision makers, because in a way you can really think about tuning the thresholds and of the acceptable risk, which is an eminent political decision. But in a way, our role as scientists was to unveil these trade-offs and to show how taking certain decision would have affected differently the area that we were going to work with. So what ecological knowledge do we need to inform ecosystem-based MSP? First of all, we have to think about the purpose of planning. So we have to answer to specific planning demands. There is a challenge about producing ecological knowledge at the scale, at the geographical scope of planning. And this is not just a matter of when you set your model, but there are really some ecological questions that really need a disciplinary effort, I would say, because of the passage of scale and in between, for instance, experimental results or modeling results in the real world is still something that, for instance, marine ecologists are struggling with. It is an information that a knowledge that should be spatially explicit and specific to the area that is managed. We have to be very clear that what we do is with our best available knowledge, and to revise and adapt to the plan as soon as we are able to get new knowledge. So I was wondering to present another case, but I will jump this and I will just close with these final remarks.
It depends if you prefer to give more time to exchange and answer questions, or if you prefer to present a case, because we need to start in 10 minutes another presentation.
No, I prefer to get the feedbacks from our peers. So I would just give some final remarks. So in a way, I think we have a great opportunity now, which is about working for ecosystem-based MSP that can truly support conservation. And the fact that management and planning operates in the context of solving problems, this needs a specific formulation for our hypotheses and our models as a scientist. Also, policy demands require specific knowledge and cause-effect relationship that we can work to inform, but with really specific perspective of solving problems and not just unveiling the relationships of the system per se. That is something that is a bit of a struggle. As our role as a scientist, I agree that advocating is risky. I agree. In my experience, I felt that it was a bit risky. So, but we can make trade-off explicit. So we can be very explicit about the consequences of alternatives that we can show to the decision makers. So for them then to make decisions. And then to be transparent about the limits of our models, or the knowledge that we don't have, or the best knowledge that we have. So, because in a way, we always struggle as a scientist between the best available knowledge and to be as much as complete as possible. But this is not really helpful when we are dealing into decision-making process. So this is the experience I wanted to share with you from a series of projects that I was part of, and also from the new project that I'm going to run for the next 3 years. And I'm very happy to get your experience about addressing and answering to specific policy needs as a scientist, or in your experience. So I would open the interaction with you on this.
Thanks, Elena. I think we already have people raising their hands.
Yes, we have Yernea, so I'm going to ask Yernea to turn on her camera and microphone. Thank you.
Hi, I just spelled it in the chat. I don't really want to usurp the space. I've spoken before, so if there's other people on the list, I'm happy to wait.
No, go ahead, please.
So I just wanted to open the debate about, which I think is a little bit broader than just this, but actually I think it's a good moment also to raise it now. There's a clear push for transparency, and Elena has spoken clearly about that. But I find that transparency and especially participatory engagement with stakeholders is very much limited by the fact that the models and the content of models is a black box to many of us. So the MSP works a lot with models, and there are very sophisticated models, such as, I believe, the one that you mentioned, Marxian and others. And all that the majority of people get out from this is the outcome. And we never understand how the models are built, and neither do we see what the input is into the models. And I think there's a difficulty between ensuring transparency and not being entirely, and not making this models very explicit. And I guess a lot of that just comes down to the fact that a lot of us, and certainly me included, are not in this area. And so there's an embarrassment to say, oh, can you just show us how this works? But for policymakers, I think a lot of times they are just presented with the outcome of models and are not really engaged in all steps and all the different assumptions that are made. So on the specific talk that Elena gave us, I would have a question that relates to whether we can see how this Marxian operates, and like, can we make this a little bit more tangible for those of us that are not within the domain of MSP? But more broadly, I wanted also to raise this issue of science policy interface, and so in the interest of having an effective science policy interface, we, I think, need to be more honest with what and unpacking the models that we use. And I think this issue is actually much broader than just related to MSP, but scientists often take, as soon as they say models, then that's kind of like in the background, and nobody really dares to open the concept of models. And I think there's a lot of assumptions that go into it that are not being quite open and clear about.
So thanks for this question, because in a way it is critical, because usually when us as scientists we interact with decision makers, we don't have so much time to dive into models. So in a way, what I found useful is to interact at the proper level and with the proper context with different persons. So in a bit to tailor what the contents were according to the person I was talking with, or the groups I were talking with. So for instance, in interacting with in a meeting with let's say less formal meeting with a person from a specific agency that is connected to the ministry about and where I know that the person I'm talking with has the key, let's say, to understand, I would be more direct also on the type of model that I use. Actually, these models that I showed was exactly in the line that you were saying, to unveil the black box. And actually, when I showed you the slide about the fact that the way we modeled the costs in Marxian advantage some uses against others. This was exactly in the direction that you were pointing out. So we were very explicit in saying that, in a way, in showing that. I'm not sure if I think that trust between scientists and policymakers are not based on the fact that we show the models to them, because I feel that sometimes they don't have, but because it's not their role to know how to understand the models. And I also change sometimes. I let's say I use a very layman language when I have to deal or to speak with them about, for instance, cumulative effect assessment. I think that the trust of the models is given by the fact that there is a system for these models to be trusted, which is the peer review. So in a way, there are these mechanisms to trust the models. I think that more is in trying to find the good way of communicating with them about this. Like I remember one discussion we had with a high-level manager, a high-level officer of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs about MSP at least 7 years ago and more. And basically all he wanted to know about conservation was, I want to have shrimps on my plate. This was his level of reflection, you know? And so I think that, and when we were in such a discussion, I had to find a way to communicate the core of my model, but not demonstrating it with mathematical equations, or not saying what is the algorithm behind the Marxan, because it would have not get it. I just said, but look, that if you want to have the shrimps on your dish, you need to think about that the shrimp can only survive in a certain environment that can support this. In a way,
Elena, I'm really sorry to step in. I apologize, and I don't want to feel rude, but we have an agenda issue with Maria, who needs to speak before she goes to teach. And I see we also have Cinzia and Barbara who wants to say something. And I would suggest, because we're going to have a break after Maria's speech, we can either use the break for the questions, or I give you the floor again as after the break, so that we give a chance to you to end up the talk around this, if it's okay with you, Audrey, also. Yes, but it's really interesting, and I think the case of what it looks like in real life, you know, having a politician saying, I want to eat shrimps is really a great example, and there's a lot to talk around this also. Elena, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Would you like to build on or add something to what you did in your part before we give the floor to Audrey?
If there are specific questions, but like I think I pointed out what I wanted to say. Like in the respect of models, I have, and how unveiling the black box, as I said, I would say there are moments, or you have to be careful to do it in specific moments, occasions, or with specific people, and using the right words. And so it's a bit to tailor a bit what is your message when you present what you've done. And on the other side, so if there are no questions, I would leave it like that.
Okay, thank you. I think we had two people, actually. I see Cinzia, who is raising her hand.
Hi, thank you, Elena, for the presentation. It was very interesting. I was just wondering, in your models, when you consider uncertainty and scientists' output, I think it's a system problem with the scientists and science. When we try to publish things that doesn't go well, it gets rejected, right? So we have a very big problem on communicating negative results of experimental outputs, for instance. Do you consider these kind of things in the models, or how to deal with this uncertainty regarding science in this marine spatial planning? Because of course, there's also kind of a positive thoughts of scientists sometimes when you work in certain areas. So how to deal with this? Do you include any of these analysis in your models? That was my question.
Elena?
Yes, very briefly, actually, like the novelty from which we published that work was exactly because we described the point-by-point uncertainty. So this was the novel aspect, I would say, because of the policy framework we had, which was different from the literature that you find on cumulative effect assessment, which was about the model and so on. And so I think that this was a good result, because in a way we turned something that was a difficulty in an opportunity to advance knowledge and science. So I agree that we are trained to be robust as much as possible, and also to hide a bit our incompleteness. But I would say there is a difference between negative results and uncertainty, because like we have the idea that whatever model is perfect, like we don't have to pass the idea that we know that model is an abstraction of the reality. So whatever abstraction is partial. So there is something that is not complete in whatever model we do, and so we have to be more explicit on that. But I agree that we have to reflect more on this part. And I can send you a paper, a nice paper about reflecting on how to model for problem solving instead of modeling to get how the world works. And it's a very nice, thought-provoking paper that I can share with all of you.
Thank you very much. If I can just make one comment more.
Sure.
Okay, that's because it's very key. For example, when we do restoration of areas today, we are talking about a lot of restoration, that we know successes and where we can restore. And sometimes we can only see the successes. We don't know where it doesn't work. So it would be really cool to know where it doesn't work, so we don't aim for this. So, and sometimes it's difficult to navigate, but I would love to see such results. And I think it was a very nice layer you put it in the models, this uncertainty. So that will probably give more room to work with other things as well. Thank you.
Thank you.